Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'll be working on factorization methods for quadratic equations using the grouping method in particular. Now, this is one of the simplest methods of factorizing, and I'll explain to you a really easy way to factorize any quadratic by grouping as long as it's possible. So as you can see on the screen, I have written down 3 steps, and honestly, these are the only 3 steps that you need to know, and they're extremely easy to follow, really simple, really short. So let's get on with it. So to start with, first of all, to factorize any quadratic by grouping or any other method, you must know that it's quadratic, and you should know that it should be in this form. So there should be an x squared term, an x term, and a plain number like a c, or it could be any number. So a, b, and c can be numbers, any numbers, decimal, fractions, whole numbers, could be anything, while the x squared and the x are constants. So it should be in this format. And so I'll be giving you some examples here. Let's start with a very, very basic example of a quadratic equation. I have x squared minus 2x minus 15 equals to 0. So let's say the question has given you this and it tells you to factorize it. So first of all, I'd like to make it clear that in this video, I'll only be explaining equations where the coefficient of the x squared is 1. So that means like equations with a greater than 1, for example, 2x squared or 7x squared or anything else. I'll explain it in my next video because the rule is slightly different and I don't want to confuse you guys. So yeah. Now, coming back to what I've written. So we are given this as a simple example of a quadratic, and we are told to factorize it. Let's look at my steps and I'll explain them to you step by step. So the first one says, find s and p. Now the s I've written up here is sum and p is product. One thing you should know, you don't need to calculate anything. This s and p are always given in the equation. They're right in front of you here. You don't need to find anything. You don't need to calculate anything. You just need to write them down. So this is something I do and it really works. It really helps. So I advise you to write a sum down here under the equation and a product like this. So it helps you to see everything in one place. Now the sum is always this middle number, or you can remember as either the number with the x or the b, anything that helps you remember. So I take it as a middle number always. So minus 2 is our sum. Let's write it down. So minus 2 is our sum. Again, please don't forget the sign. The sign in front of it really matters. So if it's a minus, you have to put a minus. So it is a minus 2. That's the sum. And it's always that. It is always the middle number. It is always a number here with the x that you also call the b. B is always the sum. Now the product, we should know that product means times. And in this case, the product is always AC. That means this A times this C. Yeah? So that's always the product. And in this case, the A obviously is 1 because there's nothing in front of the x squared, so that makes it 1. This is the C minus 15. So let's try and multiply the A and the C. So 1 times minus 15 is minus 15. Now this is in all cases. As I said, the sum is always this number with the x, and the product is always this times this. So this times this, 1 times minus 15 is always A times C is the product. You don't need to calculate anything so serious. You just have to write it here like this. So we have found the sum and product. Next step, find 2 numbers that add up to the s and multiply to p. Now what that means is you just have to find 2 numbers. When you add them, you get minus 2. That is the sum. And you should know that sum means add. So whenever you add those 2 numbers, you get minus 2. Whenever you multiply them, you get minus 15. Now you don't really have to, again, be so worried about finding those numbers. The more equations you will do, you'll realize that they usually use the same numbers. so you'll remember them easily. In this case, our sum is -2 and product is -15. So two numbers that add up to -2 and multiply to -15. Let's try -5 and a +3. Let's see this. If we add them, -5 plus +3. So -5 plus 3 is -2. So they do add up to -2. -5 times +3. Minus times plus is minus. And 5 times 3 is 15. So they do multiply to -15. So these are two numbers that when you add them, you get the sum number. When you multiply them, you get the product number. So these are the two numbers we're going to use. And that is it. We're done with the second step too. And the third step is just to write them in brackets, which is, I mean, it shouldn't really even be here, but oh well. So the third step just means you just have to put an x in front of it. So we have our -5 and +3. Just put an x. So x minus 5, x plus 3. And this is your answer. You don't have to do anything else. That is it. That is how easy it is. Just put an x in front of the -5 and the +3, and you're done. You have your answer. Yeah? This is how easy it is. So the first step, find the s and p, which is always given to you in the equation. The s is always the middle number, and the p is always the a times the c, or the number in front of the x squared times the number without an x, or the first number times the last number, anything that helps you remember. The second step, find two numbers that add up to this s value, two steps that multiply to the p value, and that should not be confusing to remember because sum means plus and product means minus normally in math. So you shouldn't be too confused to remember that. And once you found those, just put an x in front of them like this and put them in brackets, and you're ready. You're done with your answer. So it's not long. It's really, really simple. Just in case you're still a bit confused, I'm going to be solving another example now. So let's write another equation, quadratic equation, to help you understand better. X squared minus 5x plus 6 equals to 0. Let's say the question has now given you this, and it tells you to factorize this equation. Now we're going to be using the same steps. There's nothing different. It is still a quadratic equation in this form, and you're still going to use the grouping method. So just come here, use these steps, and you'll get your answer, something like this. And it's very easy. There's no change at all. So let's go to step 1. Find s and p. As I said, s is always the middle number, right? The number with the x. So let's see. Let's write it down under the equation as I do it. So we have this, the sum and product. The sum is always a middle number, so this -5 here, the number with the x. So that would be -5. Again, please don't forget the sign. If you forget the sign, you'll get it wrong. You have to look at the sign in front. If it's a plus, write a plus. If it's a minus, write a minus. That helps you know things, and if you don't do it properly, you'll get that wrong. So please write the sign. So it's a -5 and not a 5. So that is the sum number, always the middle number. Product number, always the a times the c, or the first number times the last number, anything that helps you remember. So just like we did here, we multiplied the one with the -15. Let's look at this. Our a, again, is 1, because it's an x squared, which is the same as 1x squared. And our c is a +6, yeah? So this time it's not a minus. It was a -15 in the previous. This time is a +6. So let's multiply the 1 and a +6. So 1 times +6 is the same as 1 times 6, and that will give you a 6. So our sum is -5 and our product is 6. We are now done with the first step. The second step says find two numbers that add up to s and multiply to p. So let's look at this. Two numbers, when you add them, you get -5, and when you multiply them, you get a 6. How about we try a -2 and -3? Let's try and add them. So -2 plus -3. Yeah, I advise you to put them in brackets because sometimes the signs will be different, so it'll help you decide what sign to use. So minus 2 plus minus 3. Plus times minus is a minus, so minus 2 minus 3. Minus 2 minus 3 is minus 5. So adding these two, it does give you a minus 5, so you have the sum. Let's multiply them. Minus 2 times minus 3. A minus times a minus is a plus, and 2 times 3 is 6. So that's what we have here, the same as plus 6. So we have a sum of minus 5 and a product of plus 6. So these two numbers do give you a sum of minus 5 when added and a product of 6 when multiplied. So we're going to be using these two. We're now done with our second step 2. Now the final step, write your answer in brackets. So let's do this. Just put an x in front of them and put them in brackets. So x minus 2, x minus 3. You don't have to do any change, nothing at all. Just put an x and put them in brackets. And that is your answer. That is it. That is how easy it is. And you can easily just do it with these 3 steps. Sometimes you can be given equations where you'll be given extremely frightening numbers. Something like, 36x squared plus 288x plus 540 equals to 0. Now let's look at this. These numbers are really, really big and really, really hard to solve. Now, usually when you're in lower classes, the question wouldn't normally give you these big numbers. It expects you to know that these can be simplified. So whenever you see these big numbers, don't get nervous all of a sudden. Just find a way to simplify it because it's usually the answer. So just try and see if there's any number that can go into all these 3 numbers without a decimal or a fraction. So let's see. If you look at it, if you try and figure it out, you will realize that obviously 36 can be divided into 36, so you get a 1. 288 can also be divided by 36, and you will get an 8. And 540 can also be divided by 36, and you'll get a 15. So honestly, there's always a way to simplify. This can sometimes be a trick wherein people try to find the sum and product of the big numbers and end up getting confused. What you can really do is try and simplify these, and this will usually be possible in exam questions because no exam will actually give you numbers this big, especially in lower classes. So keep in mind that there's usually a way of simplifying. So just look for it, and I'm pretty sure you'll end up with a much easier equation like we have here. So we'll get a 1x squared, which is the same as x squared, plus 8x plus 15 equals to 0. This is the equation we are now left with. And this, I'm pretty sure, is very easy to factorize using the steps I had given earlier. So let's go back to the steps. The first step says find the s and p. Again, they're very easy and in the equation. So the s is always a middle number. P is always AC. So let's just write it down under the equation. Sum product. So the s is always the middle number, as I said. This time it is a plus 8, so we're going to write a plus 8. And the product is AC. So 1 times 15. This time it is not minus, it is a 15, a plus 15. So 1 times 15 is 15, plus 15. So this time, these are the 2 numbers that we have gotten. The sum is always the middle number, and product is always the first times the last, or AC. Now that we have the sum and product, we know that we are done with the first step. Second step, find 2 numbers that add up to s and multiply to p. And the 2 numbers that add up to 8 and multiply to 15. Let's see. So how about a 5, a plus 5, and a plus 3. Plus 5 plus 3 will give you an 8, because 5 plus 3 is 8. There is no minus, so there's nothing complicated. 5 or plus 5 times plus 3 or 3 is 15 plus 15, so plus 8 and plus 15. So you now have these two, and you realize that 5 and 3 do add up to give you the sum number, and they do multiply to give you the product number. So you have your answer, and all you do is do the third step and put an x in front of it. So x plus 5, put your bracket, x plus 3. No other calculation, nothing complicated, just put an x here, put an x here, put your brackets, put your brackets. That's how easy it is. There is nothing else more complicated. Finally, before I finish, sometimes the question can give you a more confusing thing by adding an extra element. So it's not really confusing, but some people do end up getting things wrong here. So let me give you an equation. X cubed plus 2x squared minus 63 is equal to 0. So let's look at this. Let's say the question has given you this, and it now tells you to factorize it. So I told you earlier on when I started the video that to factorize it, it should be in this form. But looking at this, let's look at this equation. It is not in that form because there is an x cubed and not an x squared. The second term is, there should be an x here. The second term is an x squared, and the third term is an x. So there's no c, there's no number without an x. So obviously it's not in that form. So some people do get confused with this, but honestly it's not confusing. So what you have to do, if you're given x's in all of them, but the x is one more than what you're supposed to have, you can easily factorize the x out. That means you bring the x out, so you now subtract it from this, subtract it from this, and obviously this is to the power of 1, so you subtract it from this. So that'll mean you will be left with x squared plus 2x, because 2 minus 1 is 1, minus 63, because 1 minus 1 is 0, and anything to the power 0 is 1 itself, so x becomes 1, and 63 times 1 is 63. So you're left with this once you factorize. So if you have an equation where the x's are more than what you're supposed to have, just look at it. If all of them have an x, then you can easily factorize it out to get a quadratic. So now with this x being out, you do realize that you have a quadratic over here, and this is something you can factorize using the methods I showed you earlier. So let's look at this. The first step, we said we have to find the sum and product. So let's write it under this, sum, product. Always write it under the equation so you'll see it in one place and it's easy to remember. So sum and product, sum is always the middle number, as I said. So the middle number, or the number with the x or the b, whatever you call it, is a plus 2. Product, AC, the a is 1, as we know. So 1 times minus 63. 1 times minus 63. Let me just write it here this time, which will give you a minus 63. Now, I know the number is big, but again, it's not really hard to guess what numbers, because the numbers aren't big themselves, the two numbers that you get. So we're done with the first step. We have found the sum and we have found the product. Now we have to find two numbers according to our second step that add up to the s and multiply to the product. So add up to get plus 2, and when you multiply them, you get a minus 63. So what two numbers are they? Let's think of this. So how about a 9 and a minus 7? So 9 plus minus 7 will give you, so a plus and a minus becomes a minus. So 9 minus 7, which gives you a 2. So it does give you a plus 2, that is, 2 is the same as plus 2. So it does give you a sum of plus 2. 9 times minus 7, this is a plus. Plus times minus is a minus. 9 times 7, 63. So it does give you a product of minus 63. So we know that our two numbers are 9 and minus 7. And all we have to do, our final step, put an x in front of them. So this is a plus. 9 is the same as a plus. So this becomes x plus 9 x minus 7. So all you have to do, put an x here, put an x here, put a bracket here, put a bracket here, and that is your answer. There is nothing else more difficult to calculate, and it's really just this. So at one glimpse, you might feel like this isn't really a quadratic and you can't use the grouping method, but you can. And all you have to do is really just bring out the x, which is common in all of them, so that you will be left with a quadratic. So the answer to this equation is actually these two and an x here. So we should not forget that there is an x here. We factorize it out, but that doesn't mean it's out of the equation. So the factorized answer of this is x plus 9, x minus 7, and x, because the x is what we brought out, so it's still there. We just factorized this. So now that's what we're left with, and that's the answer. So it's really easy to do, really simple. You just have to find the sum number, the product number, which is always given in the equation, and find two numbers that add up to it. Thank you so much for watching. Just don't forget to write it in brackets. Don't ignore the signs, and you'll get it right, and it'll be very easy. Please keep on for my next video where I'll be explaining the rule where the a is greater than 1. So please do watch, and please like, share, and subscribe.